You won't believe the mess I found myself in. All because I decided to install a smart lock on my own pool fence. Picture this. You're minding your business, improving your home security, and suddenly the HOA Karen's son is on the phone with 911 calling you a criminal. Sounds absurd, right? But that's exactly how things went down, and it escalated into a showdown I never saw coming. It began on a warm Saturday morning. My backyard pool had always been my little escape, but lately it had turned into a non-stop headache. Neighborhood kids, including Karen's teenage son, kept sneaking in when I wasn't around. More than once I came home to find them splashing around like it was their personal water park. Sometimes it happened at night, sometimes while I was at work. I wasn't trying to be the villain here, but I also didn't want random kids risking their lives in my pool. One wrong step, and I'd be the one held legally responsible. So I came up with a solution. Replace the old flimsy lock on the fence with a new smart lock that only I controlled. It cost me a pretty penny, but I figured it was worth it for peace of mind. That morning, I set up my tools and got to work mounting the device. That's when I noticed Karen's son hovering near the fence line. He was about 18, arrogant, and always smirked whenever I confronted him about trespassing before. "What are you doing?" he called out, crossing his arms like I was the one sneaking around. "I'm installing a lock," I answered flatly. He scowled. "The pool's off limits unless I say otherwise." He muttered something under his breath and stormed off. I thought nothing of it, until 10 minutes later, the wail of sirens cut through the air. At first, I brushed it off as coincidence, but my stomach sank when a police cruiser stopped right in front of my driveway. Two officers stepped out, and trailing smugly behind them was Karen's son pointing dramatically in my direction like he had caught a thief red-handed. "That's him!" he shouted. "He's locking us out of community property." I nearly dropped my drill. "Excuse me?" I asked, stunned. One officer walked up and said, "Sir, we got a call about a possible dispute over this pool fence. Can you explain what's going on?" Karen's son folded his arms, a smug grin plastered on his face. I already knew the game he was playing, trying to make me look like the bad guy for securing my own pool. And this was just the opening move. Standing there with the police sizing me up, I could hardly believe his nerve. The kid looked so confident, as if he'd already won some imaginary battle. The officer kept a neutral tone. "Sir, this young man claims you're putting in a lock to block neighborhood access to this pool. Is that correct?" I almost laughed at how ridiculous it sounded. "Officer," I said carefully, "this is my private pool. It sits in my backyard behind my fence, and I pay for every ounce of maintenance. There is no community access here. The only people who swim here are me and the guests I personally invite." Before the officer could reply, Karen butted in. "That's not true. My mom said this pool was supposed to be shared. Everyone around here knows it. He can't just lock it up." The arrogance in his voice made my blood pressure spike. He spoke like someone who'd been raised to believe rules didn't apply to him. The officers exchanged a look, unsure of who to believe. Luckily, I had come prepared. Weeks earlier, I had printed copies of my property documents, because if you live under the rule of HOA Karen, you learn to cover your bases. I pulled the paperwork from a folder and handed it over. "You'll see here," I said. "The pool is entirely on my property. It's not listed as any communal area, and the HOA doesn't maintain it. This is solely my responsibility." One officer flipped through the pages, nodded, and passed them back. "Looks pretty straightforward to me," he said. But before I could even exhale in relief, she arrived. Karen stormed out of her house like a tornado, her shrill voice carrying across the street. "Officer! Officer! You need to stop him!" she shrieked. "He's installing some kind of electronic lock to keep us out. That pool was always meant for the neighborhood." She marched right up to my fence, jabbing a finger in my direction. The officers raised their hands to keep things calm, but Karen wasn't calming down. She went off on a tirade about community spirit and shared spaces, insisting everyone had a right to my pool. That's when I finally snapped. "Karen, this is my yard, my pool, my fence. Your son has been trespassing for weeks. That's exactly why I'm putting this lock in, to keep him and anyone else from breaking in again." The officers shifted on their feet, clearly uncomfortable. It was obvious they knew I wasn't the one in the wrong, but Karen's over-the-top performance had drawn enough attention that they couldn't just walk away. And the more of an audience she had, the more dramatic she became. That was her fuel. She jabbed her finger toward the half-installed smart lock and practically shrieked, "See, he's turning this into a fortress. If he wasn't guilty, why would he be hiding it from the neighborhood?" One of the officers sighed, already sounding worn down. "Ma'am, from what we can see, this pool and the fence are on his private property. Unless you have some proof to the contrary, there's nothing illegal about him adding a lock." Karen's son immediately jumped in. "But what about safety? What if a kid gets trapped in there? That's a danger to everyone." The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. They were the ones breaking in, and suddenly they were worried about safety. My fists clenched, but I kept my voice calm. "The danger," I said evenly, "comes from kids trespassing in my yard. If they stay out, there's no risk." Karen's face flushed red as she huffed. "You'll be hearing from the HOA. You can't just make unilateral changes that affect the community." That caught one of the officers' attention. He tilted his head. "Is the HOA actually responsible for this property?" Karen faltered, stammering through a half-baked explanation. We both knew the truth, but HOA had zero jurisdiction over my backyard. But she tried to spin it, throwing around vague phrases about community trust and shared expectations. The officers finally stepped in to wrap things up. "Sir, you're within your rights here, but I'd recommend documenting any future incidents, especially trespassing. It'll help if this escalates further." Karen shot me a glare so sharp it could have cut glass. Her son muttered something under his breath, but the smug confidence was gone. They sulked back toward their house, but I could feel the storm brewing. This wasn't over. Once the patrol car rolled away, I finished mounting the smart lock and tested it twice. The electronic click when it sealed shut gave me a sense of victory, but also a warning. I knew Karen wouldn't just let it go after being embarrassed in front of the police. Sure enough, that night, the motion sensor lights snapped on, and there he was, Karen's son creeping toward the gate. He yanked at the lock, kicked it when it didn't budge, then whipped out his phone. And that's when I realized he was calling 911 again. The moment I heard his voice carrying across the street, I knew this was spiraling. "Yeah, he locked the pool again. He's holding community property hostage. Get someone out here fast," he yelled into the phone, loud enough for half the block to hear. By the time the squad car rolled up again, I was already waiting at the fence, phone in hand, recording everything. This time, I wasn't going to let their lies frame the story. The same two officers stepped out, their faces etched with irritation, and like clockwork, Karen stormed out of her robe, already shouting, "Officers, arrest him! He's tampering with property that doesn't belong to the neighborhood!" I lifted my phone calmly. "Before you hear her out, you should see this." I hit play, showing the video of her son tugging at the gate, kicking it, and then making his exaggerated emergency call. The officer's jaws tightened as the truth played out on screen. One turned sharply to Karen's son. "Is this you in the video?" He shuffled, suddenly less cocky. Yeah, but..." "No buts." The officer cut him off. "That's trespassing and property damage." Karen exploded. "He's just a kid. You can't charge him for wanting to use what belongs to the neighborhood." The officer didn't waver. "Ma'am, this pool is private property. You've been told that already. If either of you set foot here again without permission, you will face charges." For once, Karen was speechless. Rage twisted her features, but she knew pushing further would only dig her deeper. Her son stood sulking beside her, glaring at me like I'd ruined his life. The arrogance from before had vanished. After issuing their final warning, the officers left. I turned to Karen and her son, my voice firm and steady. "This ends now. Step onto my property again, and I'll have you arrested. Consider this your last warning." They stomped off, defeated, without another word. I secured the gate once more, the soft glow of the smart lock shining in the dark like a guardian. For the first time in weeks, I actually felt peace. Karen never apologized. She never would. But after that night, her son stopped showing up at my fence. The lock did its job, and the police's warning sealed the deal. In the end, all it took was one smart lock, a little patience, and cold hard evidence to finally put an end to their games. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop your thoughts in the comments below.